When my daughter shouted that I should pay for the housing or leave, my son-in-law smirked and called me a useless old man. I packed my medicine, took the key to my cold house, and left. I didn't answer calls for 3 days because I wanted the family to finally feel how much I had been doing for them in silence. By the third evening, there were 27 missed calls on my screen. My daughter got through from a strange number and said my 13-year-old grandson had disappeared. My son-in-law had secretly taken him to a forest cabin for a men's trip, lied about the location, took his phone, and now returned without the boy. I knew why Igor was afraid of this trip. I knew even before I left, and I chose my resentment anyway. At night, we found a strip of an old bread bag on a wet branch. On the fabric, my grandson had written one word: Grandpa. Grandpa. These marks didn't lead to money, an apartment, or a secret document. They led to a child who had become convinced. The only safe adult had abandoned him. I had to not only find Igor, but also answer the question, can you consider yourself a good father and grandfather if you stayed silent for too long, for the sake of family peace? Like this episode, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, should Nikolai have stayed after the humiliation for his grandson's sake, or was he right to leave immediately? In my daughter's apartment, I always woke up first. Not because I, an old man, couldn't sleep. 37 years at the bakery had conditioned me. If my hands aren't busy by 5 a.m., the day just feels wrong. While Irina got ready for her shift and my son-in-law tossed and turned behind the wall, Igor and I managed to put small buns in the oven. 3 for him, 2 for me, the rest for the adults who claimed they didn't eat in the morning but searched for crumbs at night. That day, my grandson came into the kitchen, already dressed. He held his backpack in front of him and didn't let go even when he started kneading the dough. "Lost your notebook again?" I asked. "Didn't lose it." He answered too quickly. At the bakery, an apprentice would answer like that when they forgot the salt. Before even tasting it, they already know they ruined it. I asked Igor to get the rolling pin. From his loosely closed backpack, the corner of a notebook poked out. On the cover, he had drawn an oven, and next to it, a little man with long arms. Above it was written, "Safe Adult." Igor noticed my gaze and zipped the bag shut. "It's for school." I didn't turn it. "Why, did Dad say boys don't write such things?" In the hallway, a bedroom door slammed. My grandson immediately took his palms off the dough as if he'd been caught doing something shameful. My son-in-law walked into the kitchen, looked at the flour, at the backpack, and smirked. Grandpa's weakling shift has started again. Oleg took the notebook from the table before Igor could hide it, read the title, and raised his eyebrows. "A safe adult, not a safe one. Who is that?" "Someone who asks you not to tremble before every test." Igor reached for his notebook, but his father held it higher. I took the baking sheet off the stove and said the dough would collapse. My son-in-law didn't even turn his head. "We're going with me on Friday. 2 days without a phone, without Grandpa's buns. You'll at least learn how to build a fire." My grandson turned pale. He had already told me about the trip a week ago. Oleg called it a men's outing, but he didn't give an address and only told Irina it was a familiar recreation center. Igor wasn't afraid of the forest. Last time, his father forced him to walk across a fallen log over a ravine, while 2 adults laughed and filmed it on their phones. I heard the story late that evening and promised my grandson I wouldn't let him go on the next trip alone and would talk to my daughter. I didn't talk to her. Instead, I wiped my hands and took the notebook from Oleg. Put it in the kid's backpack. He's not a kid, so that's why you can tower over him. Oleg stepped back, but looked not at me, but at Igor. "So you can't even answer without your grandfather?" My grandson grabbed his backpack and left. There was no slamming of the door. Igor always tried to close doors quietly, as if the whole apartment belonged to people who shouldn't be annoyed. Irina came out of the bedroom at the last remark and asked what happened again. "Your father happened," said Oleg. "I'm raising my son, and he corrects me in front of him." My daughter looked at me tiredly. I could have told her about the ravine, but in the hallway, Igor shook his head ever so slightly, and I chose silence again. In the evening, Oleg put a sheet of paper from a school notebook in front of me. On the left, he wrote rent, electricity, and internet. On the right, the amount he thought should pay for the room. Irina sat by the window in her work sweater, not having had time to change. Igor pretended to be busy with his phone, even though the screen was dark. "I buy the groceries," I said. "Last month I paid for the washing machine. In the morning I take Igor. In the evening I pick him up." "We didn't ask you to buy the machine," replied my son-in-law. "What? And I can raise my son myself if I'm not interfered with." He named an amount, almost half of my pension. I could have paid it for a couple of months, until the heating was fixed in my house in the village. But it wasn't about the amount. Oleg wanted my help to stop being considered help, and my presence to become a service he was allowing. Irina asked us to speak quieter. I asked my daughter if she considered me a tenant. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Dad, times are hard for everyone right now. Oleg has fewer orders. You said yourself you didn't want to be a burden to us." Only then did I realize my son-in-law hadn't told her how much he earns now. He used to bring home more than Irina and was proud of it. He'd been returning early these past weeks, claiming a flexible schedule. His anger toward my room hit another door he was afraid to look behind. "If there are fewer orders, let's tally everything together," I suggested. "Not just my plate." "I won't tolerate that." Oleg slapped the paper with his palm. "You came to wait out the winter, and now you're checking my earnings and how my son is growing up." Igor flinched. I looked at my daughter again. She looked away. I folded the paper in half and pushed it toward Irina. "You say it yourself. If I'm in the way, I'll leave in the morning." My daughter seemed to expect me to remind her of her childhood, the nights by her bed, the money for her studies. I wouldn't. Love presented like an invoice goes stale fast, but my calmness angered her more than a shout. "Do you want to live here? Pay for the housing or get out?" Irina yelled. "I can't come home anymore and break up two grown men." Oleg leaned back in his chair. A flash of relief crossed his face. He wasn't the one who said the harsh words. "Let's see how a useless old man like you survives," the son-in-law said, "without someone else, kitchen, and an audience." Igor stood up so abruptly his chair overturned. He wanted to say something to his father, but couldn't. I picked up the chair and went to my room. My suitcase held 2 shirts, warm socks, medicine, and the old house key. Everything else wasn't mine. I even left the slippers by the bed. My daughter had bought them for my arrival. Irina entered as I was zipping up the suitcase. "Dad, I didn't mean right this second." Words like those always mean right this second. She leaned against the wardrobe. I waited for her to stop me, not out of pity, but because she'd heard her own voice. Instead, she said, "You're no saint either. You're constantly getting between a father and son." That was only half the truth. I'd hidden the other half from her myself. In the hallway, Oleg didn't stand up. Igor stood by the door in his socks. While Irina looked for a taxi, my grandson tucked a warm bun into my jacket pocket. "Grandpa, don't leave today. He's taking me there on Friday anyway." I crouched down so our faces were level. "I'll call you tomorrow and talk to your mother." You wanted to last time, too." He wasn't accusing me. That made it worse. I put my hand on his shoulder, but Igor had already pulled away. Standing behind him was Oleg. The son-in-law watched in silence as I made promises he had no intention of letting me keep. I reached the bus station alone. The last bus to Beryosovaya left in 20 minutes. Semyon agreed to let me stay a few days until I fixed my heating. At 69, it feels pathetic to explain to a friend that your own daughter, whom you once taught to tie her shoes, kicked you out. I found the bun right where I left it by the window. It was squashed in my pocket, but still smelled of the home that stopped being mine before I even closed the door. I didn't eat, just set it on the seat and watched the city windows dim behind the glass. My phone buzzed after the first stop. The message was from Igor. "Grandpa, he's going to take me there anyway." I started typing. "Don't be afraid. We'll sort it out in the morning." Then I deleted it. It felt as if fear could be undone by a text. I wrote something more honest. "I remember. I'll call Mom tomorrow." There was no reply. The bus moved on. The old key dug into my thigh through my pocket. and I could only think about how I'd defended my pride faster than I'd kept my word to a boy. Semyon's house was only warm in the kitchen. We slept in sweaters in the back room, and by morning, the water in the glass was cold enough to make my teeth ache. My friend grumbled that I should have fixed my heating sooner, but he didn't ask about my daughter. Men our age can only be delicate when they pretend they haven't noticed a thing. The next day I called a repairman who promised to come in a week. I needed a new pipe, a pump, and money. The kind I wasn't planning to spend in winter. I could stay with Semyon until spring, if not for the fact that two old backs barely fit by one stove. I called Igor in the morning as I promised. The phone was unreachable. I texted Irina saying I wanted to talk about Friday. She replied with one word, aloud. I figured Oleg had already turned her against me, so I didn't call back. By evening, my daughter called me herself. Her name lit up the screen, but I let it go silent. Then came a message, "Dad, pick up your meds from the bathroom," followed by a photo of my slippers left behind. Not a word about my grandson. I shoved the phone into a desk drawer. "Hurt?" asked Semyon. I left just like they asked. I'm not talking about the bus. He set a bowl of potatoes in front of me and said nothing more. The phone rang twice during the night. I didn't pick up. I felt my daughter had finally realized how much I did around the house and wanted her convenient old man back. Pride sometimes sounds almost like dignity. I confused them back then. On the third day, Semyon and I were clearing old firewood in the yard. The phone had been left inside. When we returned, there were 27 missed calls on the screen. Irina and a number I didn't know. Irina first, then Oleg. A message came from my son-in-law. "Don't overreact, everything's under control." I called my daughter. She didn't answer. Unknown number called me back almost immediately. "Dad, don't hang up," Irina said. The voice was strange, a woman's. Later, I found out she was at a neighbor's using her phone because her own had died from calling everyone. "Where's Igor?" "Oleg took him yesterday morning," said. "To the base out of town. Back by evening." At night, he texted that they were staying over. I asked for the address. He sent me a name that doesn't exist at all. Now the phones are off. I sat down right on the bench by the stove. Friday had arrived, while I was counting how many days I had the right to be offended. "Igor didn't want to go," I said. "How do you know?" I wanted to answer that the boy was just being fussy, and I hadn't paid it any mind. Then my daughter would have kept a good opinion of me for a few more hours. Instead, I told her about the ravine, the adults' laughter, and Igor's plea not to let him go alone. There was silence on the line. "You knew and kept quiet?" He asked me. He's a child. "Dad, and what are you?" The question hit harder than the shouting about housing. I looked at Semyon. My friend was already taking the car keys off the hook. Irina said she'd reported the disappearance and was now waiting for calls, but she couldn't just sit in the apartment. Oleg had only reached out once, repeated that his son was nearby, and told her not to have a meltdown. When she demanded he put Igor on, the call cut off. "He sent me 2 photos," my daughter said. First was a campfire, the second was Igor from behind. I checked the time. The shots were old, from a previous trip. This was no longer just clumsy reassurance. My son-in-law was deliberately passing off yesterday as today to his wife. "Send me everything you have." "Why?" "Do you know the place?" But Igor spoke about an old house and a closed-down bus stop. I decided back then that he was confused. Irina exhaled as if every new confession of mine was taking away her support. "You had no right to decide what was important and what wasn't." "I didn't. And you had no right to reject my calls either." "I didn't. I didn't ask her to put off the conversation until the boy was saved." That would have been one more request to be silent for the sake of convenience. I only said I was on my way. Semyon put my things in the car and told me not to argue. By bus, I wouldn't have made it until night. Before the drive, I dialed Oleg one more time. He answered unexpectedly fast. "Where's Igor?" "With me." "Put him on the phone." "He's asleep." Behind my son-in-law's voice, I could hear wind and the flapping of an unsecured door. No sign of a child's breathing, footsteps, or a campfire. "Name the place." "Nikolai Grigorievich, you already made a scene once." "Don't teach me how to be a father." The connection cut out. A minute later, the old message came through. "Everything is under control." Now these words meant there was no control. In the car, I opened the photos from Irina. In the picture by the fire, Igor was wearing the blue jacket he'd outgrown by spring. Behind him, a wooden house and a piece of a faded sign were visible. In the second frame, Oleg had his hand on his son's shoulder, and two men were smiling at the camera. The faces were unfamiliar to me. Semyon drove in silence, only asking for directions now and then. I zoomed in on the sign again and again. 3 white letters and a green stripe remained. In my youth, the bakery delivered goods to the villages, and similar stripes marked stops on the old route through the clearing. But there were several such places around the city. Irina called again. Now her voice was steady, almost professional. Well, Oleg texted his sister. He told her they were at Fisherman's Lake and me at the Pine Base. Me? What did he tell you? Nothing, just that Igor was with him. So that makes 3 places. Changing his story cost my son-in-law the last of my daughter's trust. Irina stopped defending him, even to herself. Dad, why did you leave if you knew about the trip? Because I wanted you to feel what it's like without me. What? That sounded petty. And it was. We felt it, she said. But Igor felt it first. I laid the phone on my lap. Semyon glanced at me, but offered no comfort. Outside the window, fields stretched out, where the snow had already melted in patches. I wanted to hurry the car, the road, my daughter, anyone, but those 3 lost days were mine. Not even the fastest driver could bring them back. At the city entrance, Semyon stopped for gas. Us. I saw one more detail in the enlarged photo. Next to the house stood a rusty shield with a round hole. There was one just like it at the terminal stop of the defunct route, number 8. I remembered it not from a map, but from bread delivery logs. We always ordered twice as many loaves there on Fridays. Irina met us at the entrance. She didn't hug me or even greet Semyon. She grabbed my phone, looked at the photo, and said there was no shield near the current base. I explained about the old terminal. My daughter opened the family chat that Oleg had started years ago for trips. She scrolled through the photos so fast her fingers missed the screen. A photo of a winter barbecue was found. The same house, only the roof was under snow. On the wall, the sign was fully intact. Route 8, Terminal. Under the picture, Oleg's sister had once written, "The house by the old clearing is free again." I know the turn, Semyon said. It's about 2 hours from here, if the road isn't washed out. Irina told him to go. Then she paused by the open door and looked at me. You'll tell me everything in the car, not just what you think is useful. I took Igor's jacket from the apartment. The striped bread bag wasn't on its usual hook. The notebook had vanished too. That meant my grandson had managed to take the things that made him feel close to me. As we pulled out of the driveway, Oleg texted again, "Igor is sleeping. I'll be back in the morning." Irina showed me the screen for the first time. She didn't ask if she should believe her husband. He never sleeps without his pillow, and the pillow is at home. We still hoped to find the boy in a warm house, but we were no longer driving to Oleg's address. We were driving along his lies. Semyon was driving, Irina sat next to him, and I sat in the back with Igor's jacket on my lap. My daughter only turned back to me with questions. Exactly. When did my grandson tell me about the ravine? Who was there? What did Oleg do after he got back? I answered most of them. Where I didn't know, I said so. Why didn't you tell me right away? Igor asked me not to. You already said that. I'm asking why you listened to a child who was afraid of his own father. I looked at the familiar back of my daughter's head and remembered how she used to hide her bad grades from her mother at 13. Back then I covered for her too, but a bad grade couldn't lead a child into the woods. I was afraid Oleg would forbid me from seeing Igor, I admitted, and that you would take his side. Irina turned around completely. So you decided to leave me in the dark just to keep your convenient spot by our side. Yes, she looked as if she were expecting an excuse and couldn't find where to direct her next surge of anger. Semyon gripped the steering wheel tighter. I told her about the school relay race, after which Oleg made his son repeat the lap in the yard until he stopped crying. About the evening, Igor hid in my room because of a broken mug. Even though my son-in-law had broken it himself, I'd called every incident a bad mood on its own. Together, they painted a picture of a home where the boy was always guessing who had the right to be afraid today. And you fixed all of that with sweet buns? My daughter asked. It seems that way. I was thanking you for your help. After these words, Irina turned away. Now, between us, it wasn't the old pay up or leave, but the knowledge that I had helped her rest inside a lie. As we left the city, Oleg called. Irina turned on the speakerphone. Where are you? She asked. On the road. The connection is bad. Is Igor nearby? Let him say one word. My son-in-law was silent for a moment, then said louder, Stop giving orders. He ran off to the store. I'm looking for him. This was the fourth version, and the first in which Oleg admitted his son had disappeared. Irina covered her mouth with her hand, but kept her voice steady. When did you last see him? An hour ago, maybe 2. He snapped because of the phone. Give me the coordinates. Instead of answering, Oleg asked if she was with me. When my daughter said yes, my son-in-law's tone changed. I knew it. Your father stirred the boy up, left to make a point, and now he's playing the hero? The coordinates, Oleg. An acquaintance's house past Fisherman's Lake. Semyon shook his head. From the old clearing to the lake was over 30 kilometers. Irina told her husband she was heading to the house with the green sign. Something dropped on the other end of the line. Don't go there. The road is washed out? I'll bring Igor myself. You just said he ran away. Oleg hung up. His new story cost him the chance to guide us. Semyon turned onto the forest road. The car started sliding in the ruts immediately. Irina held onto the overhead handle and stared ahead. I offered her the boy's jacket so she could warm it with her hands. My daughter refused. Don't try to make it easier for me right now, Dad. Just answer, if you remember anything else. For the first time, my usual care was a hindrance, not a help. I put the jacket back on my lap and started thinking honestly. Igor once asked if it was possible to walk from the clearing to Berezovoye. I answered back then that the work bus used to go through the old stop in the road, join the village one further on. For an adult, the trip was long. For a child, almost impossible. But my grandson he always remembered routes to places where he felt calm. Why did he want to reach you? Irina asked. Because I promised to be there for him? My daughter hit the dashboard and left. He left. Semyon stopped the car. Ahead, the rut had turned into black water. We can't drive any further. It's about 1 kilometer to the house. We got out. Irina took her son's jacket. I took the flashlight. Semyon stayed behind to turn the car around and promised to come from the other side if he found a dry detour. I didn't argue. My friend had done enough for us and shouldn't pay with his bad back for our family secrets. The path climbed between the pines. Fresh tracks appeared in the wet dirt, but I couldn't tell whose they were. Irina sped up every so often, then stopped to listen. Twice she thought her son was calling out. Both times it was just a creaking branch. The light was on at the house. The door was ajar. Smoke was coming from the chimney. My daughter ran ahead. Igor! But no one answered. There were 2 mugs on the porch. One had frozen sweet tea. The other was empty. I touched the iron door handle with the back of my hand. A baker's habit of checking the heat. The handle was warm. They had been here just recently. Irina went in and started opening doors. I lingered at the threshold. If the boy was hiding from his father, 3 shouting adults could drive him further away. But there wasn't even the sound of breathing in the house. In the first room lay 2 sleeping bags. One was spread out on the bed, the other rolled up against the wall. Igor's backpack was standing open. The notebook was inside. Next to it were an empty bottle and spare socks. The phone was gone. My son-in-law's knife and a pack of matches lay on the table. If Oleg had gone to look for his son, he'd intended to return. Irina picked up the rolled-up sleeping bag. No one had slept here. I wanted to say that Oleg might have arrived in the evening, but my daughter looked at me in a way that made me fall silent. She no longer needed men who invent safe explanations instead of facing facts. Behind the house was a small shed. The door was meant to be latched from the outside, but now it swung open. A child's glove lay on the floor. Irina recognized it immediately. Why had he come in here? There was no answer. We didn't turn the glove into proof of something we hadn't seen. I placed it on the step so Igor would notice it if he returned. Oleg's sister called. My daughter asked only one thing. When had her brother asked for the house key? It turned out 2 days ago, even before I left. So the trip had been planned in advance, and the argument at the table just removed the person who might have interfered. Oleg said he wanted to mend things with his son, his sister justified. I didn't know you weren't in the loop. Irina replied that she knew enough now and ended the call. We walked out to the road. There was neither Oleg's car nor his voice. A distant engine sound drifted from the forest and then faded again. Only the light from the open door remained, and 2 paths, the road to the lake and a narrow trail behind the shed. Irina wanted to follow the road, where a car might appear. I checked the backpack once more. The striped bag was gone. Igor always took our rolls in it. If he left on his own, he had food with him. Does the trail lead to the old bus stop? My daughter asked. It should, but I haven't been here in 20 years. You aren't sure? No. Before I would have answered more firmly to put her at ease. Now, honestly, I don't know. That was more helpful than late comfort. We decided not to split up. I left a note for Igor on the table. We are close by. Wait here. Irina pressed the found glove to her lips and tucked it into her pocket. From the road, an engine hummed. Headlight beams swayed between the trees. My daughter ran out onto the track. I expected to see Semyon's car with the boy, or at least a familiar silhouette in the cabin. Oleg pulled up and stepped out alone. His jacket was covered in mud. A fresh graze darkened on his palm. My son-in-law looked at the house, then at me, as if we were the ones who had caused the trouble. I told you not to meddle here. Irina didn't move. Where is my son? Oleg opened his mouth, but not a sound came from the warm, empty house behind him. Oleg looked away first, saying Igor had run off after an argument and was likely hiding by the road. Irina asked why her husband was only mentioning this now. I was looking. I didn't want to scare you. You sent old photos because you always start calling everyone at once. My son-in-law spoke habitually, as if arguing over a broken cup, but his hands were trembling. He was truly afraid for his son, yet he continued to defend himself. I asked what had happened before Igor left. Oleg looked at me with hatred. He refused to light a fire, sat down with that notebook, and declared he wanted to go home. I took his phone, then told him to sit in the annex and think, just like his father did. Did you lock him in? Irina asked. The latch is old. I just closed it for a minute so he wouldn't follow me. For how many minutes? Oleg replied, not right away. At first I said 5 minutes. Then he admitted he had gone for firewood and was gone for about half an hour or. When he returned, the door was open and his son was gone. For another hour he searched alone, fearing his wife's judgment. While my son-in-law was saving face, Igor's trail was going cold. Irina took her wedding ring off her finger, not throwing it or handing it to her husband. She simply slipped it into her pocket. You lost a child and were afraid of looking like a fool? I didn't lose him. He left on his own. Your father spent months teaching him that he could run away from me. I stepped toward my son-in-law, but my daughter held out her hand. Don't. Neither of you is going to tell me what the other did right now. Show me where you looked. For the first time that night, Oleg obeyed her without an argument. He led us toward the road to the lake. Tracks from his boots and tires were visible there, but I couldn't make out any child's footprints. Oleg insisted that Igor had run in this exact direction, claiming the boy shouted that he would reach the city without him. Igor said, to the city or to his grandfather? I asked. My son-in-law stopped. What difference does it make? The difference was 30 kilometers. A wide road led to the city, and an old path through a closed bus stop led to Berezovoye. Oleg didn't answer, and that was his answer. Irina's phone received a short call. She gave the updated location to those searching from the other side and told us not to stray far. But Oleg walked toward the car. I'll check the highway. He might have made it to people. We stay together, my daughter said. While you're sniffing around Grandpa's buns, I'll find my son. Real panic hadn't made him any kinder. It only stripped away a thin layer of decency. Irina made no move to stop her husband. I said she would come with me to the shed and he should check the road and keep his phone on. So you're choosing his version. I'm choosing Igor. Oleg got into the car so abruptly that the door bounced back and he had to slam it a second time. The headlights disappeared between the trees. By the shed, I found something I hadn't noticed before. On the wet threshold lay a poppy seed crumb. Our buns had no poppy seeds, but Igor liked to sprinkle one separately for himself. The crumb didn't indicate a direction. It only confirmed that the bread bag was with him. When he left, Irina ran her finger over the wooden latch. He left his son here because the boy got scared. Yes. And you left him in the apartment for the same reason? I wanted to argue, but I couldn't find an honest difference. Behind the shed, the path forked. The left went to the lake, the right climbed to the old clearing. On a branch to the right hung a narrow strip of white fabric with red checks. I took it down and immediately recognized the bag. My wife had sewn it from a kitchen towel. Along the edge were short cuts. Igor and I had made them before mushroom hunting so he could tear off markers on the go. Did he leave this? Irina asked. I think so. But the strip only says where he went from here. My daughter took it, looked at her mother's stitches, and returned it to the branch. If Igor comes back, he'll see his own mark. The second strip was found after a few hundred steps. The path vanished into a washed-out area, and the boy had tied the fabric above his height, standing on a stump. For the first time that night, Irina smiled. Not out of joy, but from recognizing her son. He always thinks about how to return. I remembered teaching Igor to leave visible signs when we went for mushrooms. Back then, it was a game. I didn't think the boy would use it to run from his father to a grandfather who had left him. The third mark featured a blue line. Igor had drawn with a pen right on the fabric. Further on, the path split again. One branch led down to the stream, the other stretched along old poles. He tied the strip between them, and the direction became unclear. Irina called for her son. The echo returned only the end of his name. I knelt by the ground, but the tracks had mixed with the water. Did you tell him about the bus stop? My daughter asked. I did. And about the road to the village. Then he went along the poles, unless he wanted water. We stood before the two paths, and for the first time the decision didn't depend on my memory, but on how well a mother knew her own son. Irina chose the poles. Igor couldn't stand wet socks and would even walk around puddles in the summer. He would only look for the stream if he were extremely thirsty, but there was a bottle in his backpack. We walked along the clearing. 10 minutes later, Oleg called. He had found a small boot print by the road and demanded we return. Irina asked for the size. My son-in-law went silent, then said he hadn't measured. Igor had a strange habit of tying his laces around his ankle. And on the soft ground, a side print remained. Oleg hadn't seen anything like that. Don't touch the print and send me the location, my daughter said. We'll check later. So you trust him more? Right now, I only trust what I can name for certain. She hung up. In those few hours, Irina had changed more than in recent years. She stopped trading in calm and started enduring the uncertainty. The fourth strip was found on a dry pine tree. On it, written in blue pen, was the word Grandpa. The letters were blurred from wet fingers. I squeezed the fabric, then immediately flattened it out. This wasn't a love note. The boy was leaving a route for the addressee. He believed I would search for him even though I hadn't even answered his mother's calls. He was coming to you, Irina said. He was heading somewhere where he hoped he wouldn't have to explain why he was scared. Ahead, the clearing ended in fallen trees. Beyond them began the old asphalt overgrown with grass. I recognized it from this road. A workers' bus used to run here. The stop was a few kilometers away. At night, for a 13-year-old, they could feel much too long. We called out for Igor together. There was no answer, but to the right, near the creek, a branch snapped. Irina rushed toward the sound. A gray back flashed below. A beast, not a boy. We went down to the creek anyway, but found neither fabric nor boot prints. My daughter suggested returning to the asphalt herself. It was her choice, not my command. Oleg was calling again. Irina replied with a text. Check the road. Don't distract us. Just yesterday, she had asked me not to stand between father and son. Now her husband was hindering her search for the child. On the asphalt lay the fifth strip held down by a stone. The blue line pointed forward. Igor wasn't just running. He was building a route in the dark, like an adult whom no one would help. That precision scared me more than the forest did. The road began to slope downward. My knees were shaking, Irina was limping, but we didn't stop. At the fork, another strip was hanging. On it, Igor had written 2 uneven letters. Did the ink run out, or did his fingers freeze? He was calling for you, my daughter said. I looked at the road leading to the old stop. That means he must be able to hear. We kept walking, no longer arguing about who was right. Being right couldn't keep a child warm. The old asphalt quickly ended under dirt and pine needles. There were no more strips. Perhaps the bag ran out, or perhaps Igor had turned off. I walked in front, stopping every few minutes. Irina called for her son, but her voice grew hoarse. By a fallen birch tree, I saw a narrow track in the mud. A line trailed alongside it, as if a child had been dragging a stick. We followed it and reached a stream in 15 minutes. The tracks ended at the water. Are you sure that's his? My daughter asked. I was about to say yes. The print was the right size. The direction matched, but hoof prints were found nearby. The line was left by a branch pulled by an animal. No, I was wrong. Irina closed her eyes. 15 minutes there, 15 back. In that time, the cold had grown more intense. Oleg caught up with us on the road. The track he found by the highway was a child's, but an old one. Dry pine needles lay in the depression. My son-in-law wouldn't admit his mistake, saying at least he was checking a logical path. And you just wander after scraps like in a fairy tale. Irina turned to him. Those scraps were left by your son. You can walk beside me and be quiet, or keep checking the road. I won't waste any more energy on you. Oleg walked behind us. After a few steps, he began calling for Igor. For the first time, his voice held neither commands nor irritation, only fear. I heard the father in him, who could have existed had he not viewed weakness as a disgrace. But now, it wasn't enough. According to my memory, we were about 2 kilometers from the old bus stop. My memory had already led us to the stream once. I warned Irina that I might be wrong again. She replied, Then we will be wrong together. Just don't stay silent. The road rose up onto an embankment. Irina slipped on the wet clay and twisted her ankle. Oleg reached for her, but my daughter immediately pulled away. She could walk, though she was limping more heavily. Let's go back to the house, my son-in-law said. They will find us faster there. Igor might return there, too. Were you already expecting him to come back? Irina replied. Oleg fell silent. The suggestion was logical for adults, but for Igor, the house had ceased to be safe. The boy was moving toward the settlement, so we continued on. Beyond the embankment, a concrete slab appeared, but there was no shelter. I saw only the rusty mounts where the sign had been. In my memory, everything was different. A canopy to the right, the road straight ahead, a small quarry behind. Now the forest had grown over, and the clearing was gone. Where is it? Oleg asked. You said it was another 2 kilometers? I said that? I was wrong. My son-in-law cursed and suggested we split up. Irina refused. We had already lost time on confident guesses. Then I remembered not the shelter itself, but the bread crate. The factory truck didn't approach it via the main road, but down a short side path because the driver didn't want to turn at the quarry. If we could find the old path, it would lead to the canopy from the other side. I explained this without making promises. Irina nodded. Oleg asked why I didn't remember sooner. Because people don't remember the past in order, I said, especially when they're afraid. We turned toward the low posts. Asphalt appeared under our feet again. A tiny red and white knot hung from one post. The last piece of the bag. Igor also found a side slope. The slope led us to a gray shelter. The roof had collapsed on one side. The glass had long since been smashed, but the back metal shield still blocked the wind. First I saw the backpack, then a sneaker, peeking out from behind the bench. Igor, I called out. He didn't answer. Irina beat me to it, knelt beside her son, and pressed her fingers to his neck. The boy opened his eyes but didn't seem to recognize us. His jacket was soaked, his hands tucked under his armpits. In his fist, he held the last scrap of the bag. Oleg reached out to pick up his son. Igor jerked so sharply he hit the shield. Don't touch me. My son-in-law stepped back. I took off my jacket and covered my grandson without trying to hug him. I asked if he could tell me what hurt. Igor whispered nothing, even though his whole body was shaking. Irina spoke to him briefly. Mom is here. Help is coming. You don't need to stand up. I heard in her voice the clarity I denied her when I hid the truth. I had to answer, I told my grandson. He looked at me. His gaze was neither joyful nor angry, just too tired. I was walking to you. 4 words heavier than his wet backpack. Igor intended to walk a path that a bus once took nearly an hour to travel. He didn't want to die or punish his parents. He simply chose the only address that hadn't previously demanded he prove he was a man. Oleg stood by the entrance, covering his face with his palms. For the first time, I didn't feel only anger toward him. A father found his son alive and realized the boy preferred the night woods to returning to him. But sympathy didn't change what led Igor to that bus stop. When people arrived with a warm blanket, Igor let his mother help him up. He didn't lean on me. Oleg walked nearby, repeating that it was all over and it would be warm at home. My grandson never once looked his way. In the car, Irina sat next to her son. I stayed opposite, pressing my wet jacket to my chest. My son-in-law tried to get in, but Igor said firmly, "Don't let Dad come with me." Oleg froze. Irina didn't try to talk her son out of it. "Drive behind us and tell the neighbor that Igor has been found." It wasn't a final verdict, just the first decision where an adult's convenience was ranked below the boy's safety. On the way, Igor asked how long I'd spent in the village. I replied, 3 days. Was the phone working? It was working. Did Mom call? She called. I did not answer. Irina closed her eyes. I could have added that I didn't know about the disappearance, but that's not what my grandson was asking. He wanted to know if I was unavailable, or if I chose not to hear. Why? You were offended. Igor turned toward the window. I was offended too, he said, but I went. I had nothing to counter that with. A 13-year-old boy walked through the night to find a man, while that man was busy proving his dignity to silent phones. At the admission office, Igor was quickly taken away to be warmed up and examined. We were only told that he was conscious. No serious injuries were visible yet, and for now we just had to wait. That was enough. I didn't remember any medical terms except for one. Stable. Irina sat by the door. Oleg arrived after 20 minutes, walked up to his wife, and held out her ring. Found it near the forest house. It was lying by the car. It must have fallen out of her pocket when Irina ran to the porch. My daughter didn't take it. I didn't want him to leave, my son-in-law said, but I wanted him to be scared. I wanted him to understand. He understood that he needed to run away from you? Oleg looked at me, implying it's fine to run to me. He abandoned both of you because of money. I didn't argue. My son-in-law was speaking the truth for the first time, at least partially, and that part didn't belong to him, but to Igor. The door opened, and Irina went in to see her son alone. A few minutes later, she called me in. Igor was lying under 2 blankets. His hair was still damp. On the nightstand lay the last scrap of striped fabric. I stopped at the door. May I? My grandson shrugged. He used to always make room for me beside him. Now he didn't move. I sat on a chair. I found your markings. Mom found them. We were together. If she hadn't called, would you have come? Would you have come? I didn't try to make promises after the fact. I don't know. I did wrong. Igor stared at the piece of the bag for a long time, then turned to Irina. Mom, Grandpa knew everything, not about the house, but about Dad. He knew and told me to be patient. My daughter looked at me no longer as a person who had found her son, but as an adult who could have prevented him from leaving. In the morning, they said Igor would remain under observation for another day. Oleg immediately started talking about going home. He explained that a familiar bed would calm his son, and extra questions would only reinforce his fear. He had already spoken about the extensions sitting separately. He had taken the phone away to remove a distraction. Irina listened without interrupting. Then she asked her husband to repeat everything in front of Igor. Why torture the child? We are adults, we'll sort it out ourselves. That's exactly why it ended up in the woods, because the adults sorted it out without him. Oleg turned to me. Are you satisfied? Now my daughter is speaking with your words. I sat by the corridor window, holding a bag with my grandson's dry clothes. Before I would have answered, but Irina didn't need my voice over hers. My son-in-law sat down beside me. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said quietly, I searched for him all night. I know. You wanted to hurt him, you wouldn't have searched. You wanted him to be scared, and didn't think where fear would lead him. Oleg clenched his fists. Yesterday's scrape was covered with a bandage. At his age, I was already working with my father. Nobody asked if I was afraid or not. And were you afraid? He looked at me almost in alarm. To answer yes meant to see himself in his son. Oleg stood up and walked to the wall. When Irina called us into the room, my son-in-law went in first. Igor immediately pulled the blanket up to his chin. Son, I overreacted yesterday, Oleg began. But you must also understand, you cannot leave at night. Igor looked at his mother. Can I tell my side first, and then he can talk? Irina nodded. My son-in-law opened his mouth but sat down. My grandson spoke slowly. On the trip, his father made him start a fire with one match. When he failed, he called him a mama's boy. Igor took out his notebook because he wanted to finish his schoolwork. Oleg read a few lines aloud to two acquaintances who visited, and everyone laughed at the words, an adult in whose presence it's not shameful to be afraid. After they left, the boy demanded the phone to call his mother. His father refused and told him to spend some time in the shed. Oleg latched the bolt from the outside. Igor found an old board inside, lifted the hook through the crack, and got out. At first he hid nearby, waiting for his father to call his mom. But Oleg walked around and scolded him, promising to deal with him properly at home. Then the boy took his backpack and set off along the path. I didn't lock it, Oleg interrupted. The latch falls by itself. Did you check it after you closed it? Irina asked. He did not answer. Igor continued. He wanted to get to the bus stop and ride to Berezovoi in the morning, thinking I was already at my house. When I realized I was lost, I started leaving strips of the bag. I knew Grandpa would understand. These words were not forgiveness, but rather a realization of who I should have been and wasn't in time. Irina asked why her son hadn't told her sooner. Igor looked at me. I told Grandpa. I had to repeat in front of everyone what I had already admitted in the car. I had asked my grandson not to argue with his father, promising to pick the right moment to talk, and each time I delayed it. When Oleg was in a good mood, it felt cruel to ruin the evening. When in a bad one, it was dangerous to start. So the right moment never came. Igor pulled the notebook out of the bag. On the page with the stove, next to the long-armed stick figure, it was written, "A safe adult isn't always the strongest. They believe you before it's too late." I wanted to write about you, my grandson said. Then I didn't hand it in. Did the right thing. Oleg smirked. Great. Now Grandpa's a saint. I'm a monster. I said I didn't hand it in, Igor replied sharply, because Grandpa didn't believe me earlier either. I apologized to him without any buts, without promising never to make mistakes again, without listing what I'd done that night. I was afraid of losing you, and that's why I stayed silent. In the end, you were left alone. It's my fault. Igor closed the notebook. But what if Dad says again that I made it all up? I will tell your mother what I heard from you earlier, and I won't keep anything secret that scares you ever again. Even if I ask, you can still keep a gift. Danger? No. He didn't answer, but for the first time he looked me straight in the face. Oleg stood up and said that the conversation had turned into a trial where no one wanted to hear him. Irina suggested they talk, but without arguing with what their son had been through. I lost my job halfway, my son-in-law suddenly said. The crew fell apart. There's almost no money. I come home and my father-in-law is cooking, fixing things, meeting my son. Everyone is happy. I'm the only one who's extra. Igor listened. In Oleg's words, there was finally a reason, not just force. I too understood why my bag of groceries annoyed him so much. But then my son-in-law added, if Nikolai Grigorievich hadn't interfered, we would have handled it ourselves. The reason had become an excuse again. No, said Irina. If Father hadn't kept silent, I would have found out sooner. If he hadn't stepped in that night, we might not have found Igor. His mistake doesn't make yours any smaller. Oleg asked his son to come home and promised to throw away the latch, return the phone, and cancel any trips. Igor asked if his father would read his notebook to his friends again. My son-in-law replied that it was just a joke. Then no, the boy said. Oleg stepped toward the bed. You don't get to decide where you live. Igor gripped the blanket. I stood up, but Irina was faster than me. He gets to decide who he wants to see right now. Get out, Ira. I am his father. That's why I had to be the first to hear no. My son-in-law shifted his gaze to me as if expecting the old man to finally take advantage of his victory. I opened the hospital door and walked out first. Not because Irina was kicking me out. Igor had asked both men to stop deciding his version of events, and that applied to me as well. A few seconds later, Oleg came out after me. In the hallway, he stopped in front of me. You got your way. Now you will live with them and I will become a visiting father. I will not live in your apartment. Of course, you're proud now. No, I just once agreed to be the convenient third adult and helped you both avoid talking. Oleg wanted to answer, but Irina's voice came from the ward. She was asking her son where he was ready to return after being discharged. I didn't hear the answer and stepped further away. It was a conversation between mother and child, not an invitation for Grandpa to find a solution. By evening, Irina came out and said that she and Igor would return home together. Oleg can take his necessary things now and live at his sister's. In a few days, she agrees to discuss what's next if the son wants to be present. Are you kicking me out because of one evening? My son-in-law asked. Because of many evenings I didn't want to know about, and because of this night. He turned to me. Tell her that's not how a family is built. Before, I would have started explaining to my daughter that you shouldn't make permanent decisions in anger. Now I replied to my son-in-law. A family isn't built on a child who has to endure things just so adults can be at ease. Oleg left, didn't slam the door, didn't make threats. He looked older than his 44 years. I felt sorry for him, and for the first time I didn't mistake pity for an obligation to fix everything. Before leaving for home, Irina went in to see her son again. My son-in-law tried to follow her. My daughter stood in the doorway. Until Igor asks for you himself, you will not enter the room. Oleg remained in the hallway. So did I. Behind the closed door, Irina and Igor were talking. 2 days later, Igor returned to the apartment. I walked them to the entrance, but didn't go upstairs. Irina packed my slippers and medicine into a bag and brought them out herself. You can stay for a couple of days, my daughter said. Not for good, until he gets used to it. Igor stood nearby and waited for my answer. The easiest path led back into that room. I would be making breakfast again, meeting him after school, and shielding him from difficult conversations. That is exactly why I refused. I will come over when you call. I'll live at Semyon's until we get the house warmed up. Irina didn't try to persuade me. Perhaps she heard pride in my refusal. In reality, for the first time, I didn't want to trade being useful for the right to be near. During the first days, my daughter called rarely. Igor only went to school with her and woke up at night. Oleg lived at his sister's, sent the boy messages, but the boy didn't open them. Every evening, I asked Irina one thing. Could I call Igor? Sometimes she would answer no, and I accepted it without resentment. On the 4th day, my grandson called me himself. Grandpa, take me to Berezovoy for the weekend. For good, he said in a whisper. Irina was in the kitchen. Igor explained that his father might return because his things were still in the closet. His mother cries at night and talks back to relatives, and he is tired of being the reason. You are not the reason. Then take me away. I promised to come and talk in front of Irina. My grandson hung up. To him, my refusal to whisk him away secretly sounded like another, just be patient. That evening, Oleg and his sister were already sitting at my daughter's place. There was a store-bought cake on the table that no one had cut. My son-in-law's sister stood up to greet me, speaking as if I'd been invited as the elder to reconcile things. Nikolai Grigorievich, you must understand, Oleg made a mistake, but the boy also caused trouble. You shouldn't destroy a family over one incident. Igor was sitting in an armchair with a notebook on his lap. His father had settled by the window away from everyone else. Irina immediately said that she hadn't invited his sister. She replied, someone has to stop this madness. Which madness exactly? My daughter asked. Father is living in other people's corners. The son is afraid to come home. My husband is sleeping over at my place while your dad walks around like a winner. I looked at the bag with my belongings by the door. The victory looked like 2 shirts, some pills, and a stranger's sofa. Oleg placed a cost estimate for my house repairs on the table. I found some people. I'll pay for the heating, the pipe, everything. You'll be able to go back home. We'll forget about that conversation over dinner. The offer was clever. He wasn't asking me to return to the apartment and wasn't demanding money. On the contrary, he was offering exactly what I really needed. But the price wasn't listed in the estimate. And what are Irina and Igor supposed to forget? I asked. Nothing, just stop calling one unfortunate trip abuse. We're all tired. We've all said things we didn't mean. Igor closed his notebook. Oleg's sister said it was unhealthy for a child to hear such adult talk. My grandson stood up. Then may I choose not to hear you? No one answered. He went into his room and closed the door. Not quietly as before, but in a way that we would all hear. Irina pushed the estimate back to her husband. Oleg didn't take it. I want to fix the thing that started it all. It all started not with a pipe at Dad's, my daughter said. My son-in-law started talking about money again. He claimed I had lived with them for free, interfered, and now painted him as a man who kicks out the elderly. His sister nodded. I took out a small notebook. I didn't intend to present it as a bill, but after my wife passed, I grew accustomed to noting large expenses so I wouldn't forget. There were groceries, the washing machine, Igor's school lunches, and the portion of utility bills that Irina took in cash. Over the winter, it amounted to less than the rent Oleg cited, but enough for the word free to stop being the truth. This doesn't buy me a room, I said, and it doesn't give you the right to raise Igor instead of you. But stop explaining everything by saying I ate your bread. Oleg flipped through the pages and pushed the book away. So you were counting after all. I was counting my money, not your gratitude. Irina took the book, stared at the sum for the washing machine for a long time, then admitted she told her husband she bought it with her bonus. She was ashamed to accept help. That's why Oleg considered the appliance his expense, but my pension, no. The family lies turned out to be a joint effort. I kept quiet about my son-in-law's rudeness, my daughter about my help, and Oleg about his lost earnings. Igor alone saw all the seams and thought he was obligated not to touch them. I will pay for the repairs myself, I said. Maybe not all at once, but I won't take money for staying silent. Oleg's sister stood up and called us proud. Irina asked her to leave. This time my daughter didn't open the door for me. Oleg stayed behind. He asked Irina how much longer he was supposed to live at his sister's. My daughter replied that a calendar won't fix what he still refuses to acknowledge. My son-in-law said he was ready to apologize for the latch, the phone, and the false address, but not for wanting to raise his son to be a man. Then there's nothing to talk about, said Irina. Oleg gathered the estimate and left. At the threshold, he paused by Igor's room, but he didn't knock. When the door closed, my grandson called for me. A suitcase was already sitting on the bed. Inside were 2 t-shirts, a notebook, and that same striped scrap of paper. Mom will allow it for the weekend, he said, and then I won't come back. Then it won't be a trip, but a deception of your mother. She doesn't know what to do herself, so I can't decide for her. Igor zipped up the suitcase. Are you simply afraid of your dad? I was. Now I'm afraid of becoming an adult like him, who chooses for you and calls it for your own good. He pushed the suitcase under the bed. His face went guarded. I don't want to be here, Grandpa. I believe you, and I'll tell your mom now. But I can't take you away secretly. Irina was standing in the doorway. She had heard everything. I asked her not to wait until her son's fear became convenient again. My daughter replied that she was afraid too. 1 paycheck, a husband without a steady job, a father in a cold house, and a boy who can't sleep. She wanted someone older to name the right decision. I've already decided for you too many times, I said. I can help, but the choice will be yours. Igor turned his face to the wall. To him, our adult honesty still meant that he would be staying in that same apartment at night. Irina told her son that Oleg would not return without her consent. Igor asked if his mother could really trust her husband again after just one conversation. I suppose I can, my daughter replied. That's why I need to look at actions, not oaths. Not oaths. My grandson agreed to spend the weekend with me if his mother brought him and picked him up herself. It was less than what he had asked for, but for the first time, the terms were set in his presence. Igor caught up with me in the hallway. Are you not coming back at all? Not to live. I will come over if you invite me. Because Mom kicked you out. At first, yes, but now it's because I don't want to buy my place with help in silence anymore. But if Mom forgives Dad, I will still be there and will tell the truth if you are scared." He looked at me for a long time. "If you won't take me, then who will choose me at all?" I could have answered, "I will." But that would have made him an object between adults once again. "I will help you speak so that you don't have to choose between people, and I will listen to you first." Igor didn't hug me. He just took my slippers out of the bag and placed them by the wall. "This doesn't mean you've returned. I know there is still a place for me by the door in the apartment, but no right to a room." For now, that was enough. For the weekend, Irina brought Igor not to Semyon's house, but to the old bakery near the village. The former shift supervisor let me occasionally use the small training oven, while the space waited for a new owner. It was empty, warm, and no one could hear our conversation through the wall. Igor came with a suitcase. I didn't ask how many days he had packed for. I poured out the flour, set out the water, and suggested we need some bread. My grandson worked in silence, angrily pushing his fists into the dough. "You said you would choose me, and then you left me there," he finally said. "I said I would be there, but I made a choice for you the first time when I decided to stay silent. I don't want that anymore. Dad makes choices. Mom is afraid to choose. You don't want to. It's convenient." I couldn't find a quick answer. Instead, I told him what I was afraid of myself. After my wife died, my daughter invited me for the winter, and I clung to that invitation more than I wanted to admit. I liked being needed by Igor. Every time Oleg was rude, I thought if I intervene seriously, they will kick me out. So I made the boy's life easier today and left the danger for tomorrow. "So you chose the room too?" my grandson asked. "Yes, only I called it family peace." Igor stopped kneading. On the table between us lay heavy, sticky dough that could not be fixed with pretty words. "I cannot promise that I will always be able to take you," I said. "I can promise you something else. If you tell me you're scared, I'll tell your mother the same day, even if you get angry at me." "That's worse. Sometimes." He plunged his hands back into the dough. Conversation wasn't over, but for the first time we were working side by side without a secret pact of silence. While the bread was rising, Igor's phone blinked. A voice message came in from Oleg. My grandson wanted to delete it without listening, then he turned it on. His father-in-law spoke calmly, apologizing for the trip, admitting he shouldn't have taken the phone and lied to his mother. He promised not to stage any more tests. That was where the good part ended. "Just tell your mom honestly that your grandfather wound you up. You weren't afraid of me before he talked to you. Tell her you decided to leave on your own, and I just didn't notice right away. Then we can be a family again." Igor turned off the recording. He's always like this. First he says sorry, then now you have to do something. I asked for permission to show the message to Irina Lorina. My grandson refused. "She'll cry again." "She will. But he is her husband, and it is her decision. And if she says I ruined everything, then I'll stay right there and say the message exists, but I won't take the phone without your permission." Igor paced the empty bakery until the timer went off. The bread was ready for the oven, but he hadn't given an answer. I didn't rush him or reach for his phone. When we pulled out the first loaf, Igor forwarded the message to his mother himself. Not to me, so I don't have to carry it like evidence. To Irina, the whole thing, he said. The whole thing. My daughter called back almost immediately. Igor didn't answer and handed the phone to me. "Tell her I'll talk this evening." "Not now." I passed on exactly that, without adding a single accusation of my own. For the first time, Irina heard her son's boundary without my translation. My daughter arrived in the evening, saw 2 loaves of bread on the table, and said we'd found a good place to escape to. Igor tensed up, but Irina immediately added, "I'm not scolding you. I'm just envious that you can be silent here and not wait for a call." She asked her son to decide if he wanted to meet with his father. Not sometime, but once in her presence. Igor asked, "Is it possible to forgive if Oleg apologizes correctly?" "No, and if I don't want to see him, that's not possible either." "But tell me that, not your grandfather." My grandson agreed to a short meeting at home, setting his conditions. His father must not lock the door, must not take his phone, must not bring relatives, and Igor can leave for his room. Irina wrote them down on a bread wrapper. I offered not to be there. My presence turned any conversation with Oleg into a competition. Will you be there? Igor said. Just don't answer for me. This condition proved the hardest of all. I nodded, though my tongue was already preparing answers for him. Irina read the condition again. If he broke one, the meeting would end. Igor asked if the marriage would end after that. His daughter replied, I don't know, but your safety won't be the price for saving it. The boy nodded, then wrapped one loaf for his mother and left the second for me. Before, he always split things equally and watched who got the bigger half. Now he decided himself who would carry what. On the way back, Irina said Oleg had indeed lost almost all his income and was ashamed to admit it. I asked if that changed her decision. It explains his shame, but doesn't give him the son to use. There were 2 days left until the meeting. I returned to my house with the repairman. The pump needed replacing. Part of the floor near the pipe had to be opened up. The price turned out higher than in Oleg's estimate. I had to skip buying a new stove and fix the old one instead. Semyon offered to lend me money, but I only accepted his help with the work. This wasn't some proud self-punishment. I wanted a house where Igor could come to visit, not a refuge that a grandfather trades with parents. Independence had to be paid for with real money and cold nights. Oleg called me himself, asking why have a meeting if Irina has already decided. I replied, the decision isn't for me or my daughter, it's for him. He can listen to his son or ask for a convenient version again. You understand men, don't you? Said my son-in-law. Sometimes a boy needs a shake-up. I understand how easy it is to call your own fear discipline. Oleg was silent for a moment. I'm afraid he will never see me as his father again. Then don't ask him to save your reputation first. That was where we ended. I didn't treat the conversation as a secret from Irina. That evening I retold her every important phrase. My daughter said it was the first time her husband named his fear, but she didn't cancel the conditions. Before the meeting, Igor asked me what to do if his father cried. I replied that he could offer comfort without agreeing to anything. Tears are not a contract. And if you start speaking for me, just say, Grandpa, leave, and I'll step out immediately. He tested that promise before Oleg even arrived, asking me to leave the room for a minute, then calling me back. I went out and returned without asking questions. Only then did Igor sit in the living room. Irina placed 4 chairs in a semicircle. I sat closer to the door. Igor kept his phone face down. Oleg arrived on time and alone. He stopped in the hallway as if unsure if he had the right to take off his shoes. Irina warned, pressure on your son will end this meeting. I understand everything, my son-in-law replied. Igor asked, what exactly? Oleg didn't expect the question. Took off his jacket and sat down across from his son. That I shouldn't have taken the phone, that I should have called Mom right away, that the extension was foolish. And why were you reading my notebook? I wanted you to not be ashamed of your own words. You laughed because you didn't know how to do otherwise. That was the first answer without blaming grandfather. Igor looked up. Irina believed him for a moment, too. Oleg leaned forward. I want to make everything right, so let's start without other people's notes and forwarding. Did you delete my voice message? Irina's hope faded. Her son-in-law had come to talk about trust, but the first thing he did was check if the thing ruining his version had disappeared. Igor put his palm on the phone. No, I forwarded it to Mom. Oleg looked at Irina. In her hand there was neither a phone nor a printout, nothing to argue with, only the memory of his voice. I recorded that at a bad moment, the son-in-law said. I wanted us to stop looking for someone to blame. You already found someone, Igor replied. Grandfather. Oleg drew in a breath and for the first time did not deny it. He explained how, after his shifts were cut, he was afraid to tell his wife the truth. Every breakfast of mine reminded him that another man was feeding his family. When Igor came to me with the notebook, I didn't see mistrust, I saw my own defeat. I wanted you to come to me just once, he told his son. Never for money or permission, just to come. Igor asked, and did you ever sit with me when I wasn't doing what you liked? Oleg lowered his head, admitted he hadn't, and apologized for laughing at the notebook, for the phone, the extension, and the lies to Irina. Every word came hard to him, but he said them without my help. My grandson listened, not softening, and my daughter didn't either. I felt the urge to prompt Oleg toward the right ending. Don't ask for anything right now. Give your son some time. But I stayed silent. If my son-in-law had changed even for one evening, he had to get there on his own. I don't know if I can believe you, Igor said. I understand. For a few seconds, it seemed that the meeting had truly taken place. Not a reconciliation, but the first honest conversation. Oleg could have left with that and kept his chance, but he looked at Irina and asked, what happens now? His daughter replied, for now, live separately, find a steady job, and meet with your son only with his consent. So I admitted everything, but the punishment stays. This isn't a punishment. We aren't ready to live together. Oleg stood up and paced the room. He clearly expected that his sincerity would immediately return him to his former place. When that didn't happen, the fear turned back into a demand. Igor, tell Mom one thing, that you decided to leave yourself. Not that your grandfather sent you, not that I kicked you out. You yourself. I already said it? Then repeat it and add that the door in the shed could be opened. You did open it after all. Igor looked at his mother. Why? So she understands I didn't actually lock you in. It all turned out scarier than it was. Can we tell the relatives that it was an accident? Irina turned pale. Oleg held out his hand to his son. If you want to save the family, help me now. Now. We were both wrong. Igor pushed his chair back. I stood up, but remembered the conditions and stayed by the door. I left on my own, the boy said. Because you took the phone, locked the latch, and didn't want to call Mom. That doesn't make you innocent. Do you hear? Oleg turned to Irina. He's repeating his grandfather's words. At 13, kids don't talk like that. They do, if adults force them to explain the same thing over and over. My daughter replied. My son-in-law asked his son again to state the convenient version, no longer gently. The word family in his mouth became the same lock, only without the latch. Irina walked up to her son and placed a hand on the back of his chair. You don't have to repeat anything. You can go. Igor looked at me. I didn't nod or shake my head. A second later, he got up on his own and went into his room. The door remained ajar. Oleg started speaking faster, insisting he had been misunderstood, that he only asked to separate the son's actions from the father's. My daughter listened until the end. I've been waiting for you to stop saving yourself with Igor's hands, she said. You didn't stop in the woods. You didn't stop at the hospital. And not now either. And your father saves himself with our hands. He left so we would come crawling back. Now he sits and says nothing like a judge. Everyone looked at me. This was the moment when Oleg could have been destroyed with one speech, listing the lies, the shed, the boy's fear. I only said, I left so that you would feel that I was needed. I ignored calls, hid what Igor told me from Irina. I am responsible for that. But you just now asked your son to lie himself. Irina took her wedding ring out of her pocket. She had had it all this time. She laid it on the windowsill, without giving it to her husband. We will live separately, for a week, and not until the first apology. After that, I'll see how you listen to Igor without payment. Are you choosing your father? No, I am choosing to stop forcing my son to save our marriage. Oleg asked if he had the right to at least say goodbye. Irina called Igor and the question. The boy replied from his room, Not today. My son-in-law heard and did not go to the door. It was his first act after the failure that didn't demand anything from his son in return. Oleg didn't pack his things right away, walking from the bedroom to the hallway, folding shirts, putting them back in the closet, then taking them out again. Irina didn't help or rush him. I stayed in the living room because Igor asked me to be nearby, but I didn't go in to see him. When the bag was ready, my son-in-law stopped by the kitchen. There was bread from the old bakery on the table. He cut a slice, then set the knife down. Can I take some? Irina replied. Ask Igor. He baked it. Oleg couldn't bring himself to do it and left the bread where it was. Before leaving, he told me, You'll take my place anyway. Anyway, I won't return to live here. Why? Now nobody is in your way. Exactly. Because if I return now, Irina will again get a ready-made man who will handle everything around the house. And Igor, a secret protector instead of a mother. We already know how that ends. My son-in-law smirked, but without his former confidence. It means everyone will be alone, separate, but not always lonely. He left. My daughter closed the door and leaned her back against it. I expected her to cry, but Irina said, "Dad, I might change my mind again. In a week, in a month. I love him." "I know. Don't tell me later that you warned me." "I won't. I'll only remind you if Igor starts being afraid again." Irina nodded. The ring remained on the windowsill. Igor came out when his father's footsteps faded on the stairs, saw my things, and asked if I would take my slippers. "No, let them stay for guests." "Mom said you can go back to your room." Irina really wanted me to stay. I wanted to as well, but I refused. "No, daughter. Now we need to learn how to visit each other." "In a cold house?" Igor asked. "I'll stay with Semyon for now. We'll get the heating running soon. And if it doesn't start, I'll keep fixing it." A useless old man will test if he knows how to live on his own. For the first time since the forest, Igor smiled. Irina winced at the word useless. Useless. Don't repeat his phrase. Now it's my joke, but only this one time. My daughter offered to help with the repairs. I didn't refuse out of pride. We agreed to split the part that she herself would want to take on. Not as backdated rent or as payment for forgiveness. By the door, Igor said, "I'll come on Saturday, if you want." "I already do." I left the apartment from which I had recently been kicked out. No one shouted or held me back. On the stairs, I heard Igor asking his mother if he could leave my slippers by the wall. Irene replied, "You can, but Grandpa will come over himself." 2 months of living apart didn't make anyone happy right away. Oleg rented a room near his new job and saw Igor twice, both times in the city, for an hour each. After the first meeting, the boy returned quiet. After the second, he said his father hadn't called him weak once. It was a small thing, but for the first time, a small thing wasn't passed off as a total fix. Irina didn't file for divorce or invite her husband back. She learned to come home earlier, even though she had to give up some shifts. Money got tighter. I helped with groceries only when my daughter asked and named the amount. Sometimes she refused. We were both getting used to help being visible without turning into control. My house repairs took longer than promised. The old pipe had to be replaced all the way to the floor. The first week I was angry about the cost and almost called Oleg to retroactively accept his offer. I sold the old trailer I wasn't using anymore, and Irina paid for part of the pump. In the transfer note she wrote, "Not rent, my share in your warmth." Igor visited on Saturdays, first checking if my phone worked, getting angry if I didn't answer right away. Then he stopped checking. We barely talked about the forest house. Instead, we cleaned the oven and argued about which bread to bake first after the repairs. One day he brought a notebook. On the page for a safe adult, the long-armed stick figure remained, but the oven was crossed out. Why? Because a location doesn't make an adult safe. He didn't draw me in its place. I was glad about that. On the first truly warm weekend, we decided to start the old bread oven in the yard. My father had built it. After my wife died, I hadn't lit it. We used to bake together for holidays, but alone, a large oven felt ridiculous. Irina arrived with tools and a new fire-resistant cord. Before, I would have said I could handle it myself. Then I would have struggled for half a day. Now I handed her the screwdriver and showed her where to replace the seal. "Are you sure I won't ruin it?" my daughter asked. "No, but we'll fix it together." She laughed. In our old house, that phrase sounded newer than any repair. Igor was kneading dough in the kitchen. The striped bag was gone. He kept the last scrap in his notebook. I offered to sew a new one, but my grandson refused. That one was for the road. He didn't need a new one. By noon, the oven had heated up. Irina brought a folding chair from the car and set it by the table. Then she got a second one. "We won't be alone," she said. I thought of the handyman or Semyon, but my daughter named Oleg. He asked to come over and talk to his son. Not through her, not in secret. Irina promised nothing, only informed Igor. In the morning, the boy allowed his father to approach the gate, but not to enter without an invitation. "You knew and kept quiet until now?" I asked. "Igor asked me to tell you before he arrived." "It's not a danger, Dad. It's his decision." I heard the difference and didn't argue that I should be the first to know everything in my own house. Oleg came on foot from the bus stop. He carried nothing in his hands. No gift, no estimate, no bag of expensive groceries. At the gate, he stopped and called Igor, even though he saw us in the yard. My grandson's phone lay on the table. He looked at the screen, then at his mother. Irina didn't prompt him. I also got busy with the oven damper. Igor answered, "I see you." Oleg said something short. The boy ended the call, but didn't open the gate. My son-in-law remained outside. In the old days, I would have felt like the master and decided myself who to let in. Now it was Igor's right, because the meeting was set for him. We put the first pan into the oven. The dough rose unevenly, one side higher than the other. Irina offered to fix it, but I told her to leave it. The first bread after a long break doesn't have to look festive. Behind the gate, Oleg sat on a board he'd brought, waited, didn't call again, didn't ask Irina to come out, didn't say it was bad for an elderly father-in-law to get upset. His waiting didn't fix the forest night, but it showed that, at least today, he was capable of not pushing the door. "How long will he sit there?" "Degatis, I asked my daughter when Igor went for water. Until my son decides, or until he realizes himself that there will be no decision today." "And what do you want?" Irina looked at her husband through the fence. "I want him to come in, and I want not to call him on Igor's behalf. Both things at once." I nodded and gave no more advice. When the bread started to smell, Igor returned to the yard, saw his father on the board, and asked why he wasn't leaving. "Because you allowed him to come," Irina replied, but not to enter, "so he is outside." My grandson took a chair his mother had set out as a second one and carried it to the gate. I wanted to help, but he shook his head, placed the chair on the inside of the fence, and sat down across from his father. Metal bars remained between them. I didn't hear the whole conversation. Igor asked if Oleg was still living at his sister's place. He answered that he had rented a room. He spoke about his new job and that he no longer drives to the forest house. Then my son asked a question that I did hear. "Do you still think I'm weak?" Oleg didn't answer right away. "I think I called everything I was afraid of myself weak. Igor looked at us with his mother, as if checking to see if we would tell him what to do next. We stood by the oven, Irina holding the peel, I holding a towel. Neither one moved toward the gate. "I'm not ready for you to come in," the boy said. "All right." Oleg remained seated, not asking when Igor would be ready. He didn't demand a deadline. A few minutes later, he got up and said he would head to the bus stop. The grandson opened the gate, but not to let his father in. He walked out himself and went with him to the turn. Irina turned toward the stove. I saw how much she wanted to call them both back and saw how she held herself back. This was not forgiveness. Igor simply chose a 10-minute walk where he could turn back at any moment. We took the bread out without him. One side rose higher and the crust cracked. Irina wanted to wait for her son, but I set the loaf out to cool. Not everything should be rushed when it's hard for adults to wait. My daughter sat at the table and looked at my house. "Won't you freeze here alone?" "I won't freeze anymore. The pump is working." "I'm not talking about the pump." "I know, but this is my home, Ira, not a place I was kicked out of, and not something to prove to you." She asked if I had forgiven her for that shouting. Forgiveness is easier than trusting again. But trust was returning. We paid for the pump together, and she told me about Oleg's arrival in advance. "And what about you?" I asked. The silence isn't gone yet. Honestly, we didn't hug. Irina stood up and brought the bread knife. Igor returned alone. Oleg had gone to the bus stop. The grandson didn't talk about the walk, and we didn't ask. My grandson pulled a second chair to the table, but chose a stool by the stove himself. I gave the first piece to my daughter, the second to Igor, the third I kept for myself, and I placed the fourth on an empty plate without explanation. The old key lay near my hand. It only opened this door. The bread turned out uneven, but it was baked through. The three of us ate. The empty chair stood nearby, and no one decided who or when anyone would sit in it. Thank you for following Nikolai on this journey to the end. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and look forward to a new family story. In the comments, write your conclusion. Does Oleg deserve a chance to regain his son's trust, or has the night in the forest changed their relationship forever?